Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're laser focused on understanding habits and how we can actually change them. We're using Gretchen Rubin's Better Than Before, the book you shared with us, as our kind of guide.
hmm
You're looking to cut through the noise and get straight to the knowledge that matters without feeling, buried in information. And that's exactly what we're here to do.
Think of this as us sifting through, well, the core of habit change just for you. We'll pull out the most crucial insights and a few surprises, giving you a clear roadmap for understanding how your habits work and, more importantly, how you can reshape them.
Okay, so what's on our agenda today? We're going to start with a fundamental truth. Knowing yourself is like the bedrock of all habit change.
Absolutely.
Then we'll explore Rubin's brilliant framework of the four tendencies because what motivates one person can completely, well, demotivate another.
Right.
After that, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of her pillars of habits. Things like monitoring, setting a foundation, scheduling, and the power of accountability. Finally, we'll tackle the strategies for kicking off new habits, making the most of fresh starts, and navigating those, inevitable desires and excuses that pop up.
And the central thread we want you to keep in mind throughout this deep dive is that there's no magic formula here. What works for your best friend might be, well, completely wrong for you.
Hmm.
Our mission is to give you the lay of the land so you can pinpoint the strategies that are most likely to click with your individual personality and how you're wired.
Okay, let's jump right in. The book starts by flipping a common idea on its head, this profoundly erroneous truism that we should cultivate the habit of thinking of what we are doing. That really made me stop and think.
It's counterintuitive, isn't it? But what's fascinating is the point that real progress, both for us as individuals and, for society as a whole, often comes down to automating more and more of our actions. Think about learning to ride a bike or typing. At first, it requires intense focus, but eventually it becomes almost second nature. Habits essentially free up our brain power for other things that need our conscious attention.
Right, it's about expanding the number of operations we can perform without thinking about them.
hmm
That makes so much sense. And then Rubin points out that people have, well, wildly different relationships with habits.
hmm
Some love them, some loathe them, some find them easy to build, while others really struggle. What accounts for this huge variation?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really underscores how much our inherent nature plays a role. Rubin herself calls herself a wholehearted habits embracer, but she quickly realized her experience isn't universal.
Okay.
Plus, the same habit can serve completely different needs for different people. A morning run, for instance, could be about fitness for one person, stress relief for another, and a chance for solitude for someone else. So, our underlying motivations and how we perceive the very idea of a habit are crucial.
And this brings us to the central question of better than before. How do we change our habits? But with the really important caveat that no one-size-fits-all solution exists. It's almost a relief to hear that, isn't it?
It really is.
What works for that super regimented person you know might be your recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. And this also raises a key point about our overall well being. Rubin talks about the essential seven, those areas where we often feel this strange mix of tired and wired.
Hmm.
We're exhausted but restless, busy but not really engaged in anything meaningful. Think about getting sucked into endless social media scrolling when you know you should be working on a personal goal or connecting with family.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well. That late night binge watching of a show you've seen a dozen times instead of actually getting some decent sleep.
Exactly. And Rubin had this insightful conversation with her husband where he pointed out that her earlier books were fundamentally about the question, how do I become happier? And this book is no, seriously, how do I actually become happier? Because so often we have a good idea of what would improve our lives, but we just can't seem to make ourselves do it.
Yeah.
And that's where the power of habits comes in. It's about bridging that gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it.
Okay, so self-awareness is the crucial first step. Now let's delve into what Rubin calls her framework for understanding how we respond to expectations. The four tendencies. This sounds like a really powerful lens through which to view our habit-forming abilities.
It is. The Four Tendencies framework examines how we respond to both inner expectations, the things we expect of ourselves, and outer expectations, what other people expect of us.
Hmm.
And based on that, she identifies four distinct tendencies: upholders, questioners, obligers, and rebels.
Let's unpack each one. First up are upholders. What characterizes them?
Upholders readily meet both inner and outer expectations. They're the people who find it relatively easy to stick to their New Year's resolutions without needing external pressure, and they consistently meet deadlines set by others. Interestingly, Rubin herself was surprised to discover she's an upholder, and it turns out to be a relatively small category. They thrive on clarity, structure, and predictability. For an upholder, a habit is often embraced simply because it's a rule they've set for themselves or a commitment they've made.
Okay, I can picture that type, someone who just seems inherently disciplined. Next, we have questioners. They sound like they need a really solid why behind everything.
You've hit the nail on the head. Questioners readily meet inner expectations. They're highly motivated to do things they personally believe are worthwhile, but they rigorously question outer expectations.
Ah,
They need sound reasoning and thorough justification for anything they're asked to do. If you want a questioner to adopt a habit, you need to convince them of its logic and benefits. They are the ultimate why people.
right.
For you, our listener, if you identify as a questioner, remember that understanding the reason behind a habit will be your primary motivator.
Makes perfect sense. They're not going to do something just because someone else said so. They need to be convinced. Now we have obligers. This is the one that I think resonates with a lot of people.
It does. Obligers find it difficult to meet inner expectations. They might struggle to do things for themselves, even if they know it's good for them, but they reliably meet outer expectations. They need external accountability to stick to habits. Deadlines, appointments with others, the fear of letting someone down, that's what drives them.
Okay.
Think of someone who can't bring themselves to exercise alone but will religiously attend a group fitness class. For you, our listener, if you're an obliger, external accountability is your superpower.
Huh.
Almost all habit advice that doesn't incorporate some form of external pressure will likely fall flat. They often find it easier to fulfill commitments to others than to themselves, and can be vulnerable to burnout because they struggle to say no to external requests.
That definitely rings true. The quote, promises made to yourself can be broken. It's the promises made to others that should never be broken. Really encapsulates that. And finally, we have rebels. They sound like the real wild cards in the habit world.
Exactly. Rebels resist all expectations, both inner and outer. They value their freedom and sense of choice above everything else.
Right.
Telling a rebel they have to do something is almost guaranteed to make them do the opposite. They wake up and think, what do I want to do today? They chafe against any form of control, even self-control imposed by a habit.
Wow.
So for you, our listener, if you identify as a rebel, think about framing habits as acts of self-expression or personal choice in the moment, rather than rigid rules.
So the idea of forming a consistent habit would be a tough sell for a rebel, wouldn't it?
Generally, yes. The very notion of a routine or a fixed schedule can feel, well, suffocating to them. However, they can sometimes embrace habit-like behaviors if they frame them as a spontaneous decision they're making in that moment. Instead of thinking, I have to go to the gym every Monday, it might be, today, I choose to go to the gym.
Interesting.
They can also channel their rebellious energy in a constructive way, like thinking, everyone says I can't achieve this goal, but I'll prove them wrong. But it's important to note that rebels, like upholders, are a relatively small category.
It's fascinating that the majority of people fall into the questioner or obliger categories. That probably explains why so much general habit advice focuses on either providing strong reasons or building in external accountability.
Absolutely.
Knowing your tendency really does seem like a fundamental key.
Absolutely. As Rubin puts it, your tendency colors the way we see the world and therefore has enormous consequences for our habits. Understanding which tendency resonates most deeply with you is the crucial first step in figuring out a habit change approach that will actually work for you.
Okay, so we've established the importance of self-knowledge through the lens of the 4 tendencies. Now let's move on to Rubin's pillars of habits. The first one is monitoring. It sounds simple, but what are the surprising insights here?
Well, the core principle is deceptively simple, yet incredibly powerful. We manage what we monitor.
Hmm.
The book highlights how often our perceptions of our own behavior are wildly inaccurate. We tend to underestimate things like how much we eat, how much money we spend, or how much time we actually spend on certain activities, like watching television or scrolling through our phones.
Oh, I can absolutely relate to that. You
Yeah.
think you just had a little snack, but then when you actually track it, you realize it was a whole lot more.
Exactly. Accurate monitoring provides a crucial reality check and helps us determine if a particular habit is even worth the investment of our time and energy.
Right.
It also allows us to identify patterns we might not have been consciously aware of, like when we're most likely to give in to a bad habit, or even noticing patterns in positive behaviors, like how often a partner does something thoughtful. The anecdote about the monitor for the broken washing machine is a perfect illustration, just seeing the concrete numbers changed behavior without any other intervention. No more fooling ourselves, as Rubin says.
And she discusses various tools for monitoring, from old-school food journals, which apparently have been shown to significantly increase weight loss, to modern wearable trackers.
Mm,
But she also points out some of the inherent challenges in accurate monitoring, like trying to gauge proper serving sizes, or the subtle ways package design can influence how much we consume.
Yes, the concept of unit bias is fascinating. This is the tendency to consume a pre-packaged or seemingly whole unit of food, even if it's much larger than a recommended serving,
Oh, yeah.
making accurate tracking difficult. Eating directly from a large container also makes it incredibly easy to lose track of how much we've actually consumed. And Rubin also draws a connection between a lack of sufficient sleep and poor self-monitoring, often leading for those unproductive cycles of online puttering.
And the idea of moderation being a potentially misleading concept because it's such a subjective term really stuck with me.
Right.
What we might consider moderate today could have been seen as excessive in a different time or context. So monitoring forces us to get specific and define what these things actually look like for us.
Precisely. While there's certainly a potential for monitoring to become overly obsessive or to distract us from fully experiencing the present moment, its overall value in fostering desired actions, such as ensuring we get enough sleep or stick to a budget, is, well, undeniable.
Hmm.
It provides that clear, unbiased picture of our current behaviors, which is the essential first step towards making informed and effective changes.
Okay, pillar number 2 is foundation, which is all about putting first things first.
Mm-hmm.
What are these foundational habits that Rubin identifies?
These are the core habits that most directly strengthen our overall sense of self-control and act as a strong base upon which we can build other positive habits. Rubin identifies 4 key areas: prioritizing adequate sleep, engaging in regular physical movement, eating and drinking in a healthy way, and decluttering our physical spaces.
Let's go through each one. Sleep seems like a no-brainer, but what's the key insight Rubin offers here?
It's the somewhat counterintuitive realization that being chronically exhausted can actually delay our bedtime.
Really?
We might logically assume that feeling tired would make us want to sleep, but sometimes we become so drained that even the simple act of preparing for bed feels like an insurmountable task. Prioritizing sufficient sleep provides us with the necessary energy for self-control in all other areas of our lives. Think of it as recharging your willpower battery.
That makes perfect sense. When you're running on empty, making good decisions feels impossible. What about move? Is this primarily focused on weight loss?
Interestingly, no. While regular physical activity offers a wealth of emotional and physical benefits, Rubin points out that it's not the primary driver of weight loss.
Okay.
Its main role is often in maintaining weight and contributing to our overall sense of well-being and energy. The crucial takeaway here is to find forms of physical activity that you genuinely enjoy and that fit into your lifestyle.
Right.
Whether it's intense workouts or gentle walks, team sports or solo activities, even just considering practicalities like having access to a shower afterward can make a difference. And she mentions her personal commandment, act the way I want to feel, noting how even a short walk can provide a significant energy boost. The key to weight loss, she emphasizes, lies in modifying our eating habits.
Okay, that's an important distinction to make.
Right.
And then we have eat and drink right. This feels like a perennial challenge for so many people.
It is, and there's a bit of a paradox at play. Our brains actually need a consistent supply of fuel to effectively manage impulses. So, eating regular, nourishing meals can paradoxically help us avoid impulsive overeating. Rubin focuses on the fundamental habit of eating only when we're genuinely hungry and stopping when we're satisfied, but she acknowledges just how difficult this can be in practice, given the numerous non-hunger-related triggers for eating and the delayed sensation of fullness.
Definitely. We eat because of routine, social cues, the mere sight of food. It's a constant battle against external and internal prompts. And the final piece of the foundation is uncluttered. This might seem less directly related to habits for some people.
But consider this. Rubin consistently emphasizes how outer order contributes to inner calm for the vast majority of people.
Hmm.
even if it's a psychological effect, a more organized environment tends to make us feel more in control and less stressed. She also touches on the broken windows theory on a personal level, how small signs of disorder can subconsciously erode our sense of well-being and make us feel less productive and creative. What constitutes a broken window can vary from person to person. For one, it might be an unmade bed, for another, a messy car, for someone else, a sink full of dirty dishes. Addressing these seemingly minor areas of physical clutter can have a surprisingly profound impact on our overall mental state and our capacity for self-control.
I can absolutely see that.
Yeah.
A cluttered physical space often leads to a cluttered mental space. So establishing these foundational habits really sets the stage for successfully tackling other desired changes. The next pillar is scheduling. If it's on the calendar, it happens. This also seems pretty straightforward. But what are the key nuances Rubin brings to this idea?
Well, scheduling transforms activities from something we have to consciously decide to do each day into something that becomes more automatic, more like a pre-existing habit. It also forces us to confront the finite nature of our time and make deliberate choices about how we spend it. What's particularly interesting is how scheduling resonates with different tendencies. Upholders appreciate the inherent predictability. Questioners can see the logical efficiency, and for many obligers, a scheduled activity creates that crucial external accountability.
Okay.
Rebels, however, might initially resist the idea of a rigid schedule. For you, our listener, consider how your tendency might influence your approach to scheduling. A rebel might find more success in loosely blocking out time for desired activities rather than rigidly assigning specific slots.
Right. It could definitely trigger that inherent resistance to being told what to do, even if it's by their own calendar.
Exactly. Rubin shares her personal experience of using scheduling to finally establish a consistent meditation habit, detailing the initial challenges and how putting it on her calendar made all the difference. She also makes a useful distinction between fixed habits, which we aim to make as automatic as possible, and unfixed habits, which require more conscious decision-making each time, advocating for making beneficial habits as fixed as we can.
And she really emphasizes the power of daily repetition, quoting Andy Warhol and Gertrude Stein. The idea that what I do every day matters more than what I do once in a while really hits home.
It does.
It's almost counterintuitive, but daily habits can sometimes be easier to maintain because you remove the daily decision of whether or not to do them.
Precisely. And strategically scheduling important habits for the morning, when our self-control is generally at its peak, with a nod to those who are naturally night owls, can be particularly effective.
Good boy.
She also shares a charming anecdote about alternating game time and reading time with her children, highlighting the importance of also scheduling in enjoyable activities to build those positive associations with habits. And for those small, less appealing but necessary tasks, she suggests using weekly scheduling to prevent them from constantly nagging at our mental energy. And for procrastinators, having a structured schedule can provide a sense of clarity and reduce the anxiety that often fuels procrastination.
That makes so much sense. If it's already on the calendar, you're far less likely to put it off until later, which often means never. The final pillar of habits is accountability. Someone's watching. This seems particularly critical for obligers, as we discussed.
It is absolutely essential for obligers, but it also plays a significant role in habit formation for most of us. Accountability at its core means facing consequences for our actions, even if that consequence is simply the awareness that someone else is monitoring our progress.
Right.
Think about the motivating power of deadlines at work, late fees for overdue bills, or even the social pressure of telling a friend you're going to start exercising.
And even the perception of accountability can be surprisingly effective, like the anecdote about the gym referrer who might not even be paying attention.
Exactly. The mere belief that someone might be keeping tabs on you can be a powerful motivator. Rubin discusses the significant value of accountability groups and partners, both in person and virtual, as a way to provide that external structure and support. She also shares a really insightful anecdote about a computer science professor trying to help his struggling graduate students, illustrating how different tendencies require vastly different levels and types of accountability to be effective. What provides just the right amount of helpful structure for an upholder might feel completely stifling or irrelevant to an obliger.
So understanding someone's underlying tendency is absolutely key to providing the kind of accountability that will actually be beneficial. Okay, we've explored the fundamental pillars of habit formation. Now let's delve into the practicalities of getting started. The book has a section called The Best Time to Begin. It's enough to begin. What are the crucial insights about taking that initial leap?
Well, the wisdom in those old adages really holds true here. Well begun is half done, and don't get it perfect, just get it going. Often, the initial step is the most challenging.
Hmm.
Rubin talks about the ignition cost of starting any new action and how well-established habits essentially automate that starting process. She even employed her own first step strategy to overcome the initial inertia of writing the book itself, focusing on tackling small, manageable chunks at the beginning.
I particularly like the make the call today strategy for those small but nagging tasks we keep putting off.
Yeah.
It's all about breaking that procrastination cycle by taking immediate, albeit small, action.
Exactly. And taking that initial first step can have a surprisingly positive ripple effect, allowing us to more clearly envision the complete habit and its benefits. The anecdote about finally taking those bags to the thrift store illustrates this perfectly. Once the first step was taken, the whole process seemed much more manageable.
Yep.
Rubin also emphasizes that every first step involves a transition, and stopping that initial momentum can bring back the need for conscious decision-making and potentially derail the habit.
Right.
The yoga instructor's clever strategy of encouraging students not to stop for the summer break is a great example of maintaining that continuity. And of course, the don't break the chain strategy, famously used by Jerry Seinfeld for his writing habit, provides a powerful visual motivator for consistent action.
That visual of the unbroken chain growing longer day by day is definitely a compelling way to build momentum. Next, we have the idea that temporary becomes permanent, clean slate. This delves into the power of leveraging fresh starts.
Beginnings hold a unique power when it comes to creating new habits. Clean slates those changes in our circumstances, like a new year, a birthday, a move to a new home, or even just a minor shift in our daily routine offer us valuable opportunities for fresh starts.
Mhm.
There's often a palpable magic to the beginning, a renewed sense of motivation, and a desire to start right.
So it's about being consciously aware of these moments of transition and intentionally using them to our advantage for habit formation.
Precisely. But Rubin also cautions that these clean slate moments can easily slip by unnoticed, and the initial actions we take during these periods often become surprisingly indelible, setting a pattern for the future.
Huh.
Her anecdote about the seemingly temporary habit of checking email first thing after moving into a new house becoming a long-term pattern is a perfect example. She also highlights one of her secrets of adulthood. What we assume will be temporary often becomes permanent. Therefore, it's crucial to be mindful and intentional about the habits we establish during these transitional phases.
And then there's the concept of the lightning bolt strategy, which describes a sudden and profound habit transformation.
Yes, this is distinct from the more gradual approaches we've discussed. A lightning bolt moment is a sudden, almost instantaneous shift in behavior triggered by a new piece of knowledge, a deeply held belief, or a powerful idea. A significant life event, or even a seemingly casual comment, can act as that lightning bolt. The key thing to remember is that this type of transformation can't be deliberately invoked. It simply occurs.
In contrast to that sudden shift, there's the data point of one strategy.
This is a much more incremental approach involving personal experimentation and building conviction based on your own direct results.
Hmm.
Rubin's example of her sister's journey with a low-carb diet beautifully illustrates this. It's about adopting the philosophy of, I'm the only data point I care about, and focusing on your own experience to build belief and commitment to a new habit.
Okay, we've explored strategies for initiating habits. Now let's dive into the complexities of desire, ease, and excuses. The first topic here is abstaining, which sounds quite restrictive.
It can be, and Rubin is very clear that it's not a universally applicable strategy. However, for certain individuals, abstaining, completely giving up a particular thing or behavior, can actually be significantly easier than attempting to moderate it. For these abstainers, the constant mental negotiation and the drain on willpower involved in trying to moderate can be far more exhausting than a firm and definitive no. Her secret of adulthood here is particularly insightful. By giving something up, I gain. It eliminates that ongoing internal debate.
That makes sense for certain things that can be particularly addictive or trigger strong cravings. If you're trying to cut out sugar, sometimes a complete ban is simpler than constantly trying to have just a little.
Exactly.
But then she contrasts this with moderators, who function very differently.
Exactly. Moderators thrive on occasional indulgence and might actually rebel against overly strict rules. Knowing they can have a small treat now and then can actually make them less likely to overindulge because they don't feel deprived. So again, it really underscores the importance of understanding your own tendencies.
Next up is the crucial factor of convenience. How can we strategically leverage convenience to build better habits?
The fundamental principle here is to make the good habits we want to cultivate as easy and frictionless as possible to perform. Automating recurring tasks like bill payments or setting up automatic transfers to a savings account are prime examples of hidden, no action habits that require no ongoing conscious effort.
Mm.
But Rubin also wisely points out that sometimes the most significant form of convenience is simply eliminating unnecessary tasks altogether. As she quotes Peter Drucker, "There is nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all."
That's a powerful reminder.
Hmm.
Sometimes the best way to make a good habit easier is to just stop doing something unnecessary that's taking up time and energy. And then there's the flip side of convenience, inconvenience.
This strategy is about intentionally making the bad habits we want to break more difficult and less appealing to engage in.
Okay.
Putting your alarm clock across the room so you have to physically get out of bed, limiting your access to distracting websites, even Michael Pollan's famous advice to eat all the junk food you want as long as you cook it yourself. These are all ways to increase the friction and reduce the likelihood of indulging in unwanted behaviors. Rubin's anecdote about Anne Bass famously keeping her chocolate locked in a safe is a rather extreme but illustrative example of creating significant inconvenience.
It's true. Sometimes we don't intentionally create inconvenience around bad habits because deep down, we might not truly want to change them. The next helpful strategy is safeguards.
Safeguards are proactive measures we put in place to prevent a small lapse from spiraling into a full-blown relapse into old, unwanted habits. Rubin uses the classic story of Odysseus and the sirens as a compelling analogy, anticipating potential dangers and taking steps to protect ourselves in advance. Implementation intentions, also known as if-then planning, essentially creating specific plans for how we will respond to potential high-risk situations. If I feel stressed after work, then I will go for a walk instead of reaching for a snack, are incredibly valuable tools for building these safeguards.
Right.
It's about making those conscious decisions in advance so we don't have to rely solely on willpower in the heat of the moment.
That proactive planning seems absolutely crucial for navigating those inevitable moments of temptation or weakness. And then we have the tricky business of loophole spotting. This sounds like we're delving into the art of self-deception.
Precisely. A loophole is essentially an argument, often quite subtle and happening below our conscious awareness, that we use to excuse ourselves from adhering to a good habit. Interestingly, obligers who rely so heavily on external accountability often struggle the most with identifying and resisting loopholes as they unconsciously seek ways to excuse themselves from those external expectations.
Oh, okay.
Rubin outlines several common categories of loopholes, such as the ever-present tomorrow loophole, the temptation to postpone good habits until some nebulous future time, or the false choice loophole, where we present two non-conflicting activities as in either a situation to justify avoiding the desired habit.
Oh, I've definitely fallen prey to the "I've been so good, so I deserve this" loophole, what Rubin calls the questionable assumption loophole. And the concern for others loophole, doing something unhealthy or unproductive because you don't want to inconvenience or offend someone else, also rings a bell.
And let's not forget the increasingly common fake self-actualization loophole, disguising simple indulgence as self-care or embracing a YOLO, you only live once mentality to justify breaking a habit.
Right, YOLO.
The key is to become aware of these often ingenious justifications we create and to recognize them for what they are. Self-sabotage. Even finding a symbolic way to maintain a habit when literal adherence isn't possible can help prevent a complete break. It's important to remember that these loopholes often arise in the heat of the moment, so anticipating them is key.
Okay, so developing that self-awareness around our own mental gymnastics is the essential first step in overcoming loopholes. The next strategy Rubin discusses is distraction.
Distraction, when used intentionally, is a powerful tool for purposefully redirecting our thoughts and attention to change our immediate experience. It can be incredibly helpful in resisting temptations, minimizing stress, and staying on track with our desired habits. However, the key is to choose the right kind of distraction. Something that is genuinely absorbing and preferably pleasant, like getting lost in a captivating book, instead of mindlessly scrolling through social media when trying to avoid online shopping. Engaging in physical activity can also be a very effective form of distraction. Rubin's wait 15 minutes strategy for checking compulsive habits is a useful way to create a buffer and disrupt that immediate urge.
And she touches on how Intermittent reinforcement in things like email and social media feeds those compulsive checking habits.
Oh, yeah.
You never know when you're going to get that little hit of reward, so you keep checking.
Exactly. But distraction can also be a valuable tool for soothing agitation from criticism or alleviating your feelings of sadness, making it easier to maintain self-control in those challenging moments. However, it's crucial to be mindful of unhelpful distractions, like getting sucked into potato chip news, those endless, unsatisfying news cycles, or falling into a bad trance of mindless overindulgence in anything.
Mm.
Interestingly, she notes that establishing an earlier bedtime can often reduce the likelihood of falling into those late-night bad trances. And of course, intentionally avoiding unhelpful distractions like constant email notifications and creating distraction-free environments when you need to focus are also key aspects of the strategy. She also reminds us of the importance of allowing ourselves to stop and take breaks. To keep going, I sometimes need to allow myself to stop.
The next strategy is reward. But it seems Rubin has a somewhat unconventional perspective on the role of rewards in habit formation.
She does. She makes the important point that the most profound and sustainable reward for accomplishing something worthwhile is often the intrinsic satisfaction of having done it well.
Right.
She lists several sources of intrinsic motivation, such as a sense of challenge, curiosity, and control. Interestingly, she notes that external rewards can sometimes actually undermine our intrinsic motivation, turning activities we once enjoyed into obligations.
Mhm.
Similarly, while seemingly motivating, focusing solely on finish lines can sometimes interfere with long-term habit formation by creating a natural starting point rather than encouraging ongoing behavior. She contrasts goal setters with habit formers, suggesting that focusing on the process and consistent action is often more effective than just chasing the endpoint.
So instead of traditional external rewards, she advocates for the use of treats. What's the distinction she draws between the two?
A treat, in Rubin's framework, is a small pleasure or indulgence that we give ourselves simply because we want it, not because we've earned it as a reward or feel the need to justify it. She argues that giving ourselves these little moments of joy can actually boost our overall self-command and make us feel more energized and cared for. Her secret of adulthood here is particularly insightful. If I give more to myself, I can ask more for myself. Self-regard isn't selfish.
Hmm, I like that.
She cautions against a state of constant deprivation, as it can often lead us to abandon our good habits in a desperate search for comfort. Finding healthy treats, or even what she calls untreat-like treats.
Untreat-like treats.
Yeah, activities that are constructive but also personally satisfying, like organizing a closet or spending time on a hobby, can be very effective. She also highlights the power of childhood treats and shares her own personal example of diet soda as her go-to treat.
I like the idea of untreat-like treats.
Mhm.
Things that are productive or enjoyable in a quiet way, but don't necessarily feel like a traditional indulgence.
Mhm.
The next strategy is pairing.
Pairing involves intentionally linking a habit you want to cultivate with an activity you already enjoy doing.
Ah, okay.
The classic example is only allowing yourself to watch your favorite television shows while you're working out at the gym. This leverages the satisfaction of multitasking and can make the less desirable habit more appealing by associating it with something pleasurable.
Right.
We can also use pairing to reinforce good habits, like listening to an audiobook only while taking your daily walk,
Mhm.
or to discourage bad habits, like only allowing yourself to eat while sitting at a designated table. She also notes that pairing can be used to contain a less desirable habit by linking it to a specific, limited context, like the celebratory croissant after finishing a big exam.
That makes intuitive sense, using existing associations to help build new habits or modify existing ones. The next strategy is clarity.
Clarity in this context has two key components: clarity of our underlying values and clarity of the specific actions we need to take.
Mhm.
Often we struggle with habits because there's an underlying conflict between two important values. Rubin emphasizes the need to examine these conflicts and determine if they are actually false choices and if we can find ways to honor both values. Her anecdote about resolving the constant chore battles with her husband by hiring a cleaning service beautifully illustrates this. Clarity also involves consciously deciding not to pursue a particular habit at the current time to avoid feeling guilty or inadequate about it.
And the power of the language we use is important here, too. Consciously choosing to say, I don't do something, rather than I can't, to reinforce a sense of personal agency and control.
Exactly. And clarity of action means moving beyond vague goals and defining the specific concrete behaviors that will lead to the desired outcome.
Yeah.
A general aspiration like be more mindful is far less likely to translate into a consistent habit than a specific action, like take 1 minute for a gratitude moment every time I walk into my apartment building. Her detailed plan for their annual family get-togethers provides a great example of how clarity of action can make even complex, recurring events happen more smoothly.
The final strategy we'll explore from Better Than Before is identity. This feels like a really profound and intrinsic level of habit change.
It is. Our deeply held sense of who we are and the kind of person we believe ourselves to be has a profound influence on the habits we adopt and maintain. Rubin's example of her sister experiencing a dramatic improvement in her activity levels when she got a treadmill desk, and it aligned with her personal goal of prioritizing her health, is a powerful illustration of this.
Wow.
She also touches on the common concern that focusing on seemingly small habits can feel trivial, but ultimately establishing positive habits frees up our mental energy and time to focus on matters we deem more significant and worthy. She also revisits the idea of conflicting values and the importance of considering whether those conflicts are actually false choices based on our identity.
And the way we frame our intentions can be so powerful, emphasizing the identity. For example, saying, it's important to be a voter, rather than just, it's important to vote.
Exactly. That shift in framing from an action to an identity can be incredibly motivating. She shares a striking anecdote of someone who, after only a few days of abstaining from sugar, started to identify as someone who never ate sugar, solidifying that new behavior.
Interesting.
Publicly stating a resolution or a new identity can also strengthen our commitment. Interestingly, for rebels, embracing habits that genuinely align with their authentic sense of self and their values can be a powerful motivator, even if it seems counterintuitive to the very definition of a rebel.
But we also need to be careful not to get too rigidly attached to an identity that might ultimately limit us, right?
Absolutely. Rubin shares her personal experience of finally letting go of the identity of a real reader who finishes every book they start, allowing her to abandon books she wasn't enjoying. Even quitting a habit like meditation can be difficult if we become too strongly attached to the identity of someone who meditates. It's about using our sense of identity to support positive change and growth, not to create unnecessary limitations.
And finally, the book touches on the significant influence of other people and how their habits can shape our own.
Yes, there's a phenomenon Rubin calls health concordance, where the health-related habits of couples, for example, tend to become more aligned over time. Simply making a positive habit a consistent part of your own routine can often lead to others around you adapting and adjusting. However, the social pressure to conform can also sometimes hinder the adoption of good habits.
Yeah.
But as Rubin's own experience of successfully encouraging her daughter to try waking up earlier on Sunday mornings demonstrates, our influence on others can also be a powerful force for positive change.
The conclusion of Better Than Before brings it all together, emphasizing that there's no finish line when it comes to habits, and that the most crucial insight is that we can build our habits only on the foundation of our own nature.
Exactly. Rubin reflects on her own personal journey of self-discovery throughout the process of writing the book, particularly in understanding her own upholder tendencies. The key takeaway for all of us is that seemingly opposing strategies can often be equally effective for different people, and there are no simple, one-size-fits-all solutions. She concludes by describing her issue spotter approach, constantly observing the world around her for opportunities to foster healthier and more productive habits, and the deep satisfaction that comes from helping others navigate their own habit change journeys.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Better Than Before, the central message is clear. Transforming our habits is a deeply personal exploration. It demands a good understanding of ourselves, our individual tendencies, and our core values.
Yeah.
But as we've explored today, there's a vast and varied toolbox of strategies available, from the foundational elements of monitoring and scheduling to the more nuanced approaches of leveraging clean slates, understanding our own loophole tendencies, and aligning our habits with our identity.
And as you, our listener, are hoping, you now have a robust foundation of knowledge without feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information. Understanding these fundamental principles empowers you to approach habit change in a much more informed, intentional, and ultimately more effective way that is tailored to your unique way of being.
We really encourage you to take some time to reflect on your own humor. For tendencies, are you an upholder, a questioner, an obliger, or a rebel? And then consider just one or two of the many strategies we've discussed today that particularly resonated with you.
Hmm.
Maybe it's starting with one of those foundational habits, experimenting with if-then planning, or simply becoming more aware of the sneaky loopholes you tend to use.
Mm.
The most important thing is to start experimenting and discover what truly works best for you and your individual circumstances.
And here's a final thought for you to ponder, something to really chew on after our discussion. Which seemingly small habit, if you were to implement it consistently, do you think could create the biggest positive ripple effect across the different areas of your life? Take some time to consider that and perhaps even revisit your copy of Better Than Before with that specific question in mind.
You can also find a wealth of additional resources and continue the conversation with Gretchen Rubin herself on her website, gretchenrubin.com, and across her various social media platforms. It's an ongoing dialogue about this endlessly fascinating and crucial aspect of our daily lives. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.